The air in Sierra Blanca had a way of whispering things you weren't supposed to hear. That morning it whispered, "Run." Eli Mercer stood alone at the edge of a wind-cracked mesa, the deed in one hand, and a rusted wellhead rising from the earth like a half-buried tombstone just 20 yards ahead. Dust clawed at his boots. Heat shimmered off the red dirt. Somewhere in the distance, a buzzard circled, too low, too curious. He had bought the land 2 hours ago for 10 cents, and already he knew he had walked into something wrong. The papers still smelled of ink when Franklin Knox slid them across the table. The banker's handshake had been damp, his eyes jittering toward the courthouse window as if expecting someone to burst in and stop him. "That's it," Knox said too quickly. "All yours, Mr. Mercer. No oil, no trouble, no strings attached." But there were always strings. You just didn't see them until they pulled tight. Eli dropped his satchel beside the well, knelt, and ran calloused fingers over the timbered rim. Scratches. Fresh ones. Chisel marks no more than a few weeks old. This well wasn't abandoned. It was tampered with. He lowered a weighted rope. At 42 feet, it went slack. When he drew it back up, the end was soaked not in oil, but in clean, cold water. Oil wells don't hold water. Not in this kind of terrain. Not unless someone was pumping it in deliberately to mask something else. His gut twisted. And that old instinct, the one that once made him the best damn field engineer in 3 territories, screamed loud and clear. This land wasn't sold. It was dumped. The story Knox told him was simple. The well had dried out 7 years ago, right after the original prospector. A man named Silas Blaine vanished in a mine collapse. The territory court ruled it an accident. Knox, who'd held the lien, foreclosed and kept the land on his books like a dead tooth. Then out of nowhere, he offered it to Eli. For a dime. Eli had walked into the bank with nothing but debts, a beat-up leather satchel, and a reputation that had soured after the railroad boom dried up. Knox knew that. Everybody in town did. That's what made it suspicious. No one gives a broke man a second chance out of kindness. Not in Sierra Blanca. He set up a tripod, attached a pulley to the crossbeam, and began lowering his lantern. The light shimmered against something metal midway down the shaft. Thin pipes, recent installs running vertical. That's when he knew. This wasn't about oil. It was about whatever those pipes were meant to reach. Then came the sound, hoofbeats. He turned, squinting into the morning sun. A rider approached from the east, her silhouette cutting clean against the horizon. As she drew closer, he saw a woman in her late 20s, sharp-eyed with weather-worn skin and the kind of posture that said she'd spent more time on a horse than in a home. Her hat was bent at the brim, and her dress was functional, not decorative, trail-worn and tough. She pulled up hard beside the well. "You the fool who bought this cursed land?" she asked. Eli stood brushing dust from his trousers. "Depends who's asking." "Clara Blaine," she said flatly. "That well used to belong to my father." "Silas Blaine." Eli's eyes narrowed. "He's the one who died," she cut in. "No. He was buried." She dismounted, boots crunching against the dry clay. Her voice lowered but never lost its edge. "You want the truth, Mr. Mercer? That well's never been dry. It's been hiding something. And if you're smart, you'll fill it with dirt and forget this place exists." Eli didn't answer. He was staring at the scratches again. And the pipe. And the water. "You don't look like a man who walks away easy," Clara said after a beat. "I don't," Eli replied. "Especially when something don't add up." She tilted her head. "Then ask yourself this. Why would Knox, who won't give a penny to a starving child, hand you this land for pocket change? And why is he riding past here every morning since the sale? Eli said nothing. Because she was right. He hadn't come here looking for treasure. He came to disappear, to rebuild. But now he was in the middle of something big, something covered up, something dangerous. Clara climbed back onto her horse. There's more buried here than Pipes Mercer. Ask around, or don't. But if I were you, I wouldn't sleep too close to that hole. And just like that, she rode off, leaving Eli alone with the heat, the well, and the truth beginning to boil under his feet. That night he couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because his mind wouldn't stop turning. The fresh work on the shaft, the metal reflection, Knox's trembling hands, Clara's warning, and most of all, the gut-deep certainty that whatever was hidden 42 feet down had gotten at least one man killed. He poured himself a shot of cheap rye from his flask, sat by the well, and watched the stars shift above the desert. He wasn't religious, but tonight he spoke aloud. If there's justice in this land, let it show itself. If not, then let the guilty keep digging their own graves. Behind him, far on the ridge, a lone silhouette stood motionless, watching from the shadows. A horse shifted beside him. No sound, no movement. Just eyes in the dark, waiting for the past to stay buried. My father didn't fall. He was pushed. And that well helped bury him. Clara Blaine. The sun had barely cleared the peaks of the Sierra Blanca range when Eli Mercer rode into town, dust trailing behind his boots, and a question pounding in his head. Who the hell was Silas Blaine really, and what had he found down there? Sierra Blanca wasn't a big town. A single main street ran its spine, lined with time-worn storefronts and false front buildings left over from the silver rush that never quite materialized. These days it was a skeleton of ambition, too small to matter, too stubborn to die. Eli's first stop was the general store, where he picked up rope lantern oil, a fresh pulley system, and blasting caps just in case. The storekeep, old Judd, gave him a squint. You finally settling out on that cursed plot? Judd asked, ringing him up. Guess so. Judd spit tobacco into a rusted can. Damn things like buying a haunted house and thinking you'll get sleep. You met the daughter yet? Eli paused. Clara Blaine. Judd nodded. Spits like a rattler. Carries her daddy's ghost around like a family heirloom. Used to work the land before it got stolen out from under her. Eli didn't reply, but the weight in his chest grew heavier. He loaded the gear into his saddlebag and crossed the street to the public records office. It took the better part of an hour, but he found the old property survey's ownership transfers, and more importantly, the original claim Silas Blaine filed 7 years ago. It wasn't for oil. It was for mineral rights. Gold, buried deep under that land. The report had been stamped, pending review, then voided less than 2 weeks later. The same week, Silas died in a mine collapse. That's when Clara walked in. She stood just inside the door, backlit by the sun hat, tilted low eyes sharp. You don't waste time, she said. Most folks run from that land. You're trying to resurrect it. Eli didn't look up from the files. I found your father's original claim. Her boots echoed across the floorboards. Didn't know it was still in the system. They buried the file same way they buried the man. Clara stopped beside him. Her fingers grazed the folder like she was touching something sacred. My father didn't fall, she said quietly. He was pushed, and that well helped bury him. Eli finally looked at her. Tell me what happened. They sat on the porch of the local diner, 2 chipped mugs of coffee between them, a silence stretching like tight rope. Then Clara spoke. Silas Blaine wasn't just a miner, she said. He was meticulous. Had journals stacked floor to ceiling. Ran surveys in that land for years, convinced there was a pocket of high-grade quartz laced with gold under the basin. Eli nodded. The geology backs that up. Clara looked toward the mesa. He tried to do it the right way, filed claims, drafted letters to the Territorial Mining Board. Then one night he vanished. They said he was working late at a test shaft near the old well. Supposedly, a cave-in crushed him. No body, they buried an empty coffin. Judge Stroud ordered it. Whole thing went away faster than it started. Eli's grip tightened around the mug. And Knox ended up with the deed. Clara's eyes hardened. 3 weeks later, sheriff said it was all legal. Judge signed it. And the town moved on. But you didn't, Eli said. No, she replied. Because my father left me one letter. I found it tucked into the back of his journal, sealed in oilcloth. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a weathered envelope. Eli took it, opened it carefully. The ink had faded, but the intent was sharp as a knife. If something happens to me, it wasn't an accident. They know about the vein. I was going to file with the feds. I think Knox and Stroud are involved. Maybe more. Silas Blaine. Eli read the letter twice. Why haven't you taken this to the authorities? Clara laughed bitterly. You think territorial law is going to go after its own judge? That's cute. Eli stared into the distance, thinking. So they covered it up. Took your father's land. Tried to extract the gold themselves. They didn't expect the rock formations to shift, she said. Or the water to rise. I think they failed. That's why the well went silent. And now they've sold it off to someone dumb enough to poke around. Clara stood. You're not dumb, Eli. Just desperate. She walked toward her horse, then stopped and looked back. If you want to keep digging, fine. But don't pretend you don't know what's down there. Eli stood too. I don't pretend. But I don't walk away either. Clara nodded once. Then I hope you're armed. By the time Eli returned to the property, the sun was falling behind the ridge. He unpacked his gear, set up the new pulley, and began drawing up a plan. If they had failed to extract the gold, why the shaft wasn't wide enough? The water level was too high. The surrounding rock might be unstable. It made sense. They tried to go around it, and failed. He examined the piping again, new work. Expensive material. No way a lone banker was bankrolling that. No, this was organized. And judging by Clara's warning, still active. He unrolled a fresh survey map, began sketching. The terrain was rugged but familiar. He'd drilled through worse. If he could map the lower strata correctly, he could bypass the flooded section and reach what they couldn't. That's when he heard it. A soft creak, leather saddle, hoof on gravel. He stood, eyes narrowing toward the shadows near the well. A horse. Rider dismounted. Franklin Knox, holding a lantern in one hand and a key in the other. He walked directly to the well. Eli ducked behind the supply stack and watched. Knox pried up a loose board near the base of the structure and unlocked a small metal chest hidden beneath. Inside were rolled blueprints and a leather journal. Knox unrolled one of the pages and cursed. The measurements are wrong, he muttered. They should have reached it by now. Eli's breath caught. It was a blueprint, a shaft extension, and whatever they were trying to reach, they hadn't yet. He stepped from the shadows. Evening, Mr. Knox, he said coolly. Knox startled, the papers slipping from his hand. Mercer, he stammered. Didn't expect company. Eli stepped closer. Didn't expect a secret storage box either. Knox's face went pale. Careful what you dig up, son. I think you're the one who's nervous, Eli said. He bent, picked up one of the blueprints. His trained eye caught the pattern immediately. It wasn't an oil plan. It was a gold extraction map. You've been using my well to mark a vein, Eli said. But you couldn't reach it, could you? Knox's hand drifted toward his coat. But before either could speak, another horse approached, this one faster, more deliberate. Eli turned ready to defend himself, but it wasn't a gunman. It was a man Eli had never seen before, tall, broad, hard-faced. He dismounted before the horse stopped moving, put a hand on his hip just close enough to his weapon to send a message. "Evening, gentlemen," the stranger said. "Name's Warren Delaney. I think it's time we had a real conversation." They should have reached it by now. Franklin Knox, the wind that swept across the mesa, carried a tension Eli could feel in his teeth. Three men stood in a triangle of silence beside the old well: Eli Mercer, Franklin Knox, and the stranger who called himself Warren Delaney. Delaney didn't look like a man accustomed to talking much. He was big across the shoulders with skin like sun-baked leather and hands the color of rusted iron. His eyes were pale gray, sharp as broken glass. He sized Eli up with one quick sweep, then turned to Knox. "You weren't supposed to come out here tonight," Delaney said, voice low but solid. Knox looked rattled. His mouth opened, then closed. He surprised me. I was just... "You were just being stupid," Delaney finished for him. Again. Eli spoke before Knox could respond. "You boys want to tell me why a dried-up oil well has steel pipe and fresh tool marks running 40 feet down into groundwater?" Delaney turned toward him, slow and deliberate. "You asking questions," he said, "that don't come with safe answers." Eli didn't flinch. "I'm the legal owner of this land now, so if someone's been digging through it behind my back, I'd say I have a right to know what the hell they're looking for." Knox shifted his weight, sweat beading at his temple. "It's complicated." "No," Eli said. "It's just criminal." Delaney walked over to the well and looked down at hands resting on the rim, like he'd done it 100 times before. "You ever worked a shaft this old?" Mercer Eli nodded. "I spent 8 years engineering for the Southern Pacific. I know a deadline when I see one. But this ain't dead. You boys were trying to bypass the flood table and failed." Delaney gave a humorless smile. "He's smarter than the last one." Knox flinched. That one sentence changed everything. Eli took a step forward, his jaw tight. "You mean Silas Blaine Delaney didn't answer?" Knox tried to fill the silence. "Listen, Mercer, this doesn't have to get messy. You walk away, no harm done. We'll buy the land back. $500. Cash." Eli laughed once cold. "You sold it to me for 10 cents. "And that was a mistake," Knox hissed. "Was it?" Eli took another step. "Or did you panic? Did the costs get too high? Maybe the others pulled out. Maybe you ran out of time and figured if someone else cracked it open, you'd just swoop back in." Knox's face turned red, but he didn't deny it. Delaney sighed and looked toward the horizon. The last of the sun had slipped below the ridge and the mesa was turning to shadow. He turned back and locked eyes with Eli. "We're not the worst of what's coming, son," he said. "There are people tied to this deeper than you understand. You dig too far, you'll find more than gold. You'll find the kind of secrets that don't stay buried without a body on top." Eli stared at him, heart thudding. "Is that a threat?" Delaney didn't blink. "It's a fact." Later that night, after they'd ridden off without another word, Eli sat alone by the well, the stolen blueprints spread out on a crate beneath his lantern. They were precise, professional. But something was off. The math didn't lie. He traced the angle of the shaft, the notes on elevation, the depth. The system they'd built wasn't designed for oil at all. It was structured to punch through fractured quartz narrow and deep into a pocketed chamber below the flood layer. But the logs stopped short. The final attempt 2 months ago was labeled failed, structure too unstable. That's when he saw it. In the margin of one page, scrawled in ink, not quite the same as the rest, were 5 words. They should have reached it by now. And below it a name. Stroud. His blood ran cold. Judge Malcolm Stroud, the same man who signed off on Silas Blaine's death, who fast-tracked the property transfer to Knox, who presided over half the land deals in this county, had written that note. That made him part of it. Which meant Clara was right. Silas Blaine hadn't died in an accident. He'd died because he knew too much. The next morning, Eli returned to town. He kept his head down, hat low, but his mind was racing. He had to find Clara, had to show her the papers, had to get to someone who could help someone who wasn't on Stroud's payroll. He turned the corner near the stables and nearly ran into Noah Trammell. "Jesus, Eli," Noah muttered. "You look like you've seen the devil tap dancing." "Close enough." They ducked into Noah's workshop. Eli laid the blueprints out on the workbench, explaining what he'd found, who he'd seen, and what Delaney had said. Noah's face grew paler with every word. "Stroud," Noah whispered. "He's territorial. He's got federal connections." "I don't care if he's got lunch with the president," Eli said. "He was involved in burying Silas, maybe even ordering it. You got proof I've got handwriting, engineering notes, witnesses like Clara, a paper trail, and now a motive." Noah stared at the documents. "And what are you going to do with it? Expose him?" Noah looked up slowly. "Then you better do it fast, before someone beats you to the grave." That afternoon, Clara found Eli waiting near the church ruins where her father used to pray every Sunday before a dig. She dismounted without a word and walked toward him, the wind tangling strands of her dark hair across her cheek. He handed her the blueprint, showed her the note, showed her the signature. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was steel. "Then we go after him." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Stroud. All of them. And do what, march into court with a mining map and a signature?" "No," Clara said. "We hit them where it hurts. Reputation. Power. Legacy." She stepped closer, eyes locked on his. "They think they buried my father and bought his silence. It's time we unearth him." Eli looked back at the well beyond the horizon. "Then we dig." From a second-story window above the saloon, a man in a gray duster lowered his spyglass and watched them ride off. He pocketed a folded telegram sent from the courthouse bearing Judge Stroud's seal. Then he turned, lit a match, and whispered to no one. "Best dig quick, Mercer, before the judge sends someone to fill that hole back in with you in it. The ground never forgets the blood it drinks." Warren Delaney. The mine sat quiet beneath the late morning sun, half swallowed by desert and time. Eli Mercer stood at the entrance, staring into the yawning dark. Beside him, Clara Blaine tightened the straps on her saddle and eyed the shattered wooden beams that once marked her father's last known location. They had ridden for 2 hours across dry ravines and rocky ridges to reach this place, an outcrop known as Dead Spur Hollow, where Silas Blaine had supposedly met his end in a cave-in. But Eli wasn't buying that story anymore. Clara dismounted first. "My father used to bring me here as a kid," she said. "Said the rocks had secrets if you listened long enough." Eli ran his hand along the support post, dry rot crumbling beneath his fingers. Then let's hear what they have to say. He lit a lantern, stepped inside. The earth swallowed the light, but not the heat trapped in the air like a held breath. The tunnel angled down, sloping deep into the hillside. Old timbers creaked above their heads. They walked in silence, the only sound their boots against packed dirt and gravel. After 50 feet, they reached the cave-in. It looked staged, too clean. No buckled walls, no pressure fractures, just a mound of collapsed timber and rock, as if someone had built a wall to close off the shaft. Eli crouched, brushing dust from a beam. "See this," he pointed. "This support gave way sideways, not down. Someone used explosives. Small charge. Directional." Clara knelt beside him, voice low. "They sealed it from the inside. Or made it look like it collapsed," Eli muttered. He pulled a pry bar from his satchel and began carefully removing rubble, one piece at a time. Clara joined him, both of them working in steady rhythm. After an hour, a narrow opening appeared. Behind it, a second tunnel, pitch black and musty. Eli slid through first, raising the lantern. Then he froze. The air shifted, and there, half buried in the far wall, was a leather-bound journal wedged into a crevice. Its cover was cracked but intact. Beside it, a rusted pickaxe, its handle splintered and dry with age. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "That's his." Eli retrieved the journal gently and handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she opened the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable. Silas Blaine. The entries were dated only days before his death. "They've found out. I tried to warn Judge Stroud, told him I'd file federally, that it needed to be legal. He said we'd talk later. That was 2 days ago. Now I'm being followed. Delaney's been asking questions. Knox hasn't looked me in the eye all week. If I vanish, Clara needs to know." Entry ends. Clara pressed her lips together, jaw tight. He knew. Eli took the journal back and flipped to the final page. A simple sketch. A cross-section of the land beneath the well. Notes circled a small chamber rich with gold-bearing quartz lying beneath a fragile water table. That was the prize. That's what they killed for, and that's why they kept failing. "Your father was right," Eli said. "He had it all mapped. They just didn't have the patience or the skill to reach it." Clara nodded slowly. "Then we finish what he started." Outside the mine, the light felt blinding after so long underground. Eli turned back once before mounting his horse. The cave hadn't been a tomb. It was a crime scene. As they rode toward town, Clara tucked the journal beneath her coat, silent for the better part of the journey. She looked like someone holding back a flood with bare hands. At a ridge near the bluff, they stopped to rest the horses. Clara leaned against a rock, staring at the valley below. "You know what pisses me off the most?" she said. Eli raised an eyebrow. "They didn't even try to make it look real. They counted on people not caring, on no one digging deeper." Eli glanced at her. "They counted wrong." She turned to him. "So what now? We keep going," Eli said. "We build the case, we pull their lies into the light. And Stroud, we don't confront him yet. Not until we have something he can't burn or bury." Clara hesitated. "I know someone who might help. She's old sharp and a little crazy, but she knew my father better than anyone. Sister Agnes Bell." The nun, Clara, smiled faintly. "She's more than that." That night, Eli sat by the well again, maps and notes spread before him. He couldn't sleep, not with the journal burning a hole in his thoughts. He kept hearing Delaney's voice in his head. "The ground never forgets the blood it drinks." and now he believed it. He studied Silas's final sketch, especially the angles, the faults, the hydraulic stress markers. The gold vein was accessible but dangerous. The shaft had to be widened, reinforced, and tunneled laterally beneath the water table, not through it. He could do it. And if he did, he wouldn't just uncover gold, he'd expose a conspiracy. He looked up as hoofbeats approached again in the dark. But this time it wasn't Delaney. Clara dismounted and tossed him a folded piece of paper. "Got this from a wire clerk who owed my father a favor," she said. "Telegram came through 2 days ago. From the courthouse." Eli opened it. "To Judge M. Stroud from FNOC. Knox, subject Mercer knows. Delaney failed. Should we proceed?" Eli looked up. "They're ready to silence me." Clara nodded. "And they're not waiting long." The next morning they rode for the convent on the hill where Sister Agnes Bell lived, a place that had once offered shelter to minors and widows. Now it housed secrets. Clara knocked twice, paused, then once more. The door opened slowly. A woman in her 70s stood in the frame, eyes, bright lips pursed. "I was wondering when the past would come knocking," she said. Her gaze shifted from Clara to Eli. "You're Silas's girl," she said. "And you're the man with dust on your boots and ghosts in your eyes." "Name's Mercer," Eli said. "Mm-hmm." She stepped aside. "Then you'd better come in. There's something I think you ought to see. That's not just ink, Eli. That's a death warrant written in gold." Noah Trammell. The convent smelled of old books and dried lavender. Light slanted in through narrow windows, catching dust in golden suspension. Sister Agnes Bell led Eli and Clara through a quiet hallway lined with faded paintings of saints and martyrs' figures, who, like Silas Blaine, had died for their truth. She pushed open the door to a modest sitting room. A single wooden table sat in the center beneath a cross. A teapot hissed gently on a cast-iron stove in the corner. Agnes gestured for them to sit. "I knew Silas Blaine since before either of you were born," she said, settling into a chair with a quiet sigh. "He had a miner's hands, but a scholar's heart. Used to come here when he needed to think." Clara glanced around. "He told me he trusted you." Agnes gave a tired smile. "He trusted too many people. That was his gift, and his undoing." Eli leaned forward. "We found his journal. The one in the mine." Agnes nodded. "I figured someone would eventually. He hid copies of some things with me, too. Letters, maps. But what you're about to see, it's not a copy." She stood, walked to an old chest in the corner and opened it. From beneath a stack of hand-stitched quilts, she pulled out a leather portfolio bound tight with a red ribbon. Clara recognized it instantly. "That's his." Agnes placed it on the table gently. "He gave it to me 2 days before the collapse. Told me to keep it safe. Said if anyone ever came asking, really asking, not pretending this would be their fire starter." Eli untied the ribbon and opened the flap. Inside were papers, worn but intact. Survey maps, mineral reports, and at the bottom a contract. 5 names signed across the bottom of the yellowed page. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Eli read aloud Silas Blaine, Franklin Knox, Warren Delaney, Malcolm Stroud. He paused, and then his breath caught. There was a 5th name. Raymond Thatcher. He blinked, looked again. It was the name of the Territorial Mining Commissioner, the man responsible for approving all mineral claims in New Mexico. The man who had voided Silas's federal application. Eli looked at Clara, then at Agnes. This is it." Agnes poured tea with steady hands. Your father never wanted to cut corners. That's why they turned on him. He thought if he got everyone to sign on to split it fair and legal, they'd do the right thing. But they didn't. Clara said, voice shaking. They never do, Agnes replied. Eli and Clara rode straight back to town with the portfolio in Eli's saddlebag wrapped twice in canvas. They didn't speak much along the trail, just listened to the wind in the mesquite and the steady clop of hooves. By the time they reached Noah Trammell's workshop, the sun was hanging low and angry over the hills. Eli threw open the door without knocking. Noah, we found it. Noah looked up from his workbench, eyebrows lifting, found what Eli slapped the contract down in front of him. Noah scanned it once, then again. He leaned back slowly, running a hand over his mouth. That's not just ink, Eli, he said. That's a death warrant written in gold. Eli nodded. They all signed. Silas wanted it legal. Stroud and the rest decided it'd be more profitable if he didn't live long enough to file it. Clara crossed her arms. Now we can prove it. Noah looked up. You sure you want to? Eli stared at the papers. They tried to erase a man. Then they tried to kill me. That line ends here. They stayed in the shop late into the night copying maps and organizing the documents. Noah showed them how to waterproof the originals using wax-sealed oilskin just in case someone got to them before they reached a safe hand. By midnight, they had a plan. Clara would ride north to deliver a copy of the documents to Marshal Ruby Kane, a law officer in Las Cruces, known for going after corrupt officials, even judges. Eli would stay in Sierra Blanca, play it cool, keep eyes on Knox and Delaney. But as they packed up, a sound caught all their ears, at once hooves. Fast. Many. They doused the lights. Noah peered out the slats of the window. 3 riders, black coats, coming straight down Main. Eli's voice was low. Stroud's men. Noah unlocked the trap door behind his bench. Out the back. Now. They split. Clara rode north with the portfolio. Eli circled wide through the back trails, disappearing into the foothills. But even as he disappeared into the dark, he knew something had shifted. They had a weapon now. Proof. But they'd also crossed a line. Stroud wouldn't be sending threats anymore. He'd be sending killers. Back at the well that night, Eli stood at the edge of the shaft and stared down into its hollow throat. The wind carried the dry smell of copper and creosote. He dropped a small stone, listened. 3 seconds, then a splash. 42 feet. He unfolded Silas's final map again and traced the path with his finger. They could reach the chamber, but not from above. Not unless they rebuilt the shaft. That would take time. Equipment. Quiet. He'd need help. He'd need protection. And he'd need to stay alive long enough for Clara to reach Marshal Kane. Because once Stroud learned they had the contract, there'd be no more warnings. Men buried the truth. I just kept it breathing. Sister Agnes Bell. Clara didn't stop riding until the dawn was licking the edges of the sky, painting the desert with that strange bruised light that makes the land feel hollow. Her horse was lathered, her coat stained with sweat and dust. But she didn't care. The canvas-wrapped portfolio tied to her saddle was worth more than gold. It held the last words of her father, the signatures of 4 guilty men, and a map of what they tried to kill to keep hidden. Marshal Ruby Kane was based out of Las Cruces, a half-day's ride from Sierra Blanca. A former Army scout turned law officer, Kane had a reputation for not bending, not blinking, and not burying the truth, exactly the kind of woman Clara needed. But as the town crept into view, Clara felt a shift in her gut. That sixth sense miners like her father always trusted. Someone was watching. She veered off the main road and cut through a shallow arroyo, hugging the brush line until she circled around the back of town. There, beneath the shadow of an old mission cross, she tied off her horse and approached Marshal Kane's office on foot. She knocked twice firm. The door opened almost instantly. Marshal Kane stood in her doorway with a shotgun in one hand and half a biscuit in the other. She was in her 40s, hard-eyed with a streak of silver through her braid. No badge, no ceremony. Just presence. "You Clara Blaine?" she asked, voice dry as tumbleweed. Clara nodded. "Then you better comes inside." The marshal listened without interrupting as Clara spread the documents across her desk. The contract, the maps, Silas's journal entries. When Clara finally finished, her voice raw and shaking, Kane leaned back in her chair and let out a long breath. "I've been chasing whispers about Stroud for 3 years," she said. "But this ain't whispers. This is thunder, so you'll help us." Kane nodded. "I'll ride to Sierra Blanca myself, but we do it by the book. These men ain't just thieves, they're embedded. Stroud has friends in every court between here and Santa Fe." "I don't care who he knows," Clara said. "He murdered my father." Kane looked her over, then smiled grimly. "And you're your father's daughter." She rolled up the papers, sealed them in a steel case, and locked it in her desk. "You ride back tonight," Clara shook her head. "I'll rest a few hours, then head out. Eli's at the well. He's digging figuratively and literally. Tell him to watch his back," Kane said. "Because if Stroud finds out you brought me into this—" "He already knows we have the contract," Clara said. "We saw his men." Kane's smile disappeared. Then time just got short. Back in Sierra Blanca, Eli was hunched over the old surveyor's table he'd set up near the shaft. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, his shirt soaked with effort and anxiety. He'd spent the better part of the day reinforcing the pulley system and marking fault lines. He knew the risks any mistake could flood the shaft or bring the whole thing down. But time wasn't on his side. He couldn't wait for Kane. He had to work the angle Silas had left behind, and he needed someone who understood what the land was whispering. So that evening he returned to the convent. Sister Agnes was in the garden pruning lavender with careful hands. When she saw him, she didn't look surprised. "You didn't sleep," she said. Eli shook his head. "I need your help." Agnes wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm not young, Mr. Mercer, not strong, but I still remember how to read land." Eli smiled. "I'm not asking you to dig. I'm asking you to remember." Agnes led him back inside and pulled out a narrow map tube from beneath a floorboard in her study. "Silas and I drafted this one together," she said. "After he first suspected someone was watching him. He told me, if they kill me, make sure someone who knows rocks sees this." She unrolled the parchment. The lines were faint but clear. A second tunnel, horizontal, not vertical, marked Plan B, a bypass route, safer, slower, hidden. Eli leaned over the map, heart thudding. "Why didn't he use this? He ran out of time," Agnes said. "He thought he had a few more weeks. Turns out he had 2 days." Eli folded the map carefully. "Then we start tomorrow, before they make sure I don't get the chance." Agnes placed a hand on his arm. "They buried the truth, Eli. I just kept it breathing. Now it's your job to bring it out into the sun." That night, thunder rolled over the desert, not from the sky, but from the west. Stroud's men were arriving. Eli spotted them from the ridge, 4 riders, dark coats, quiet formation. Not townfolk, not drifters, professionals. He ducked into the shadows and made his way to Noah's shop, where he found his friend cleaning a rifle. "You see them?" Eli asked. "Yeah," Noah said. "They're staying at the empty house by the old tannery. I counted 4, maybe 5. You sure you want to stay here? We're past want." Noah handed him a canteen and a pistol. "Then let's make it count." By morning, Clara was already halfway back to town, exhausted but determined. She carried a letter from Kane promising full investigation and jurisdictional authority. She didn't know if Stroud would fold when faced with the law, but she knew he'd burn the town down before giving up his gold. She kicked her horse harder. She had to reach Eli before they did. "You wanted to bury the past. Well, it's clawing its way back up." Clara Blaine's Sierra Blanca was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that crawled beneath the skin and whispered bad omens in your ear. Eli stood outside the general store just after noon, watching dust roll across the street like smoke. Across from him, a man leaned on a hitching post, pretending to chew a piece of straw that never moved. Another sat on the bench near the saloon, eyes hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat. Still, waiting. Stroud's men. Eli turned and headed back toward the well. It was time. He'd spent the last 2 days preparing. With Noah's help, he had resecured the pulley rig, reinforced the old timber frame, and begun digging along the tunnel line Sister Agnes had shown him Silas's Plan B. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't fast. But it was real. Every swing of the pickaxe echoed with purpose. Every splinter of earth was a reminder. They killed Silas to protect this secret. And now the secret was fighting its way back out. He had left just enough noise in town, just enough visible motion to stir suspicion. A delivery of new timbers, a trip to the hardware shop, talk of a new surveyor coming in. He wanted them to notice. He needed them close. Because tonight, they were going to step right into it. Clara arrived back just before sundown, her horse trembling from the hard ride. She didn't dismount immediately. Instead, she scanned the edges of town men on porches, shadows in alleys, a stillness that didn't belong. She found Eli near the well shirt, soaked hands coated in dirt. "They're everywhere," she said, breath still ragged. 3 in the saloon, 2 near the telegraph station. One of them followed me halfway from the ridge. Eli nodded. "Let's give them a reason to act." She raised an eyebrow. "What's the plan? We let them think we've found the chamber. Tonight." Clara's lips tightened. "That's bait." Eli wiped sweat from his brow. "It's bait wrapped in dynamite. But if Stroud's watching, he won't wait. He'll send them tonight. Probably before midnight." Clara crossed her arms. "You sure we're ready?" He looked up at her, eyes resolute. "No. But I'm sure they deserve to face what's coming." She stared at him for a long second, then nodded. "You wanted to bury the past," she said, almost to herself. "Well, it's clawing its way back up." They made their move at dusk. Clara rode into town like thunder, announcing loudly to no one in particular that Eli had found something at the shaft and was preparing to dig it out under cover of darkness. Then she rode back just as fast, kicking up enough dust to turn heads. The trap was set. Noah posted himself inside the tool shed with a shotgun, eyes on the northern trail. Eli rigged 2 lanterns, one inside the main shaft, one at the tunnel mouth, to give the illusion of movement. Meanwhile, he and Clara took up position behind the well's support beams, weapons ready, nerves stretched taut. The first rider came around midnight, then a second, a third. They didn't speak, didn't announce themselves. Just approached in a slow, careful formation, guns drawn, boots soft on dirt. Eli could hear their breath, smell the sweat under their coats. When they reached the edge of the well, one of them called out, "Mr. Mercer, you in there?" Eli waited, silent. The man stepped closer. "We can settle this quiet-like. Just give us what you found. No one needs to get buried." Eli stepped from the shadows, pistol raised. "You already buried one man," he said. "Not this time." The shot rang out before the last word left his mouth. Chaos erupted. Clara fired from the flank, hitting one rider square in the leg. He screamed and dropped. Noah's shotgun boomed from the tool shed, sending two of them diving for cover behind a wagon. Eli ducked, rolled behind a stack of crates, returned fire. One of the riders tried to mount up and flee, but was thrown as the horse bolted from the noise. For nearly 5 minutes, the clearing was a war zone, smoke dust shouting gunfire. Then silence. One rider was down, moaning and bleeding. Another had fled into the dark. The rest lay still. Eli stood, chest heaving, ears ringing. Clara approached slowly, rifle still raised. Her hands were steady. Her eyes burned. "You all right?" she asked. "Still standing," Eli said. Noah emerged from the shed, reloading. "I think that went well." They tied up the injured man and gathered the weapons from the others. As they checked bodies, Eli found a folded note tucked into one man's coat. He opened it under lantern light. "Ensure Mercer is silenced. Blaine girl, too. If they find the vault, collapse it. Burn everything else." MS Clara read it and spat. Stroud signed his own damn death warrant. Eli folded the note carefully. "We take this to Marshal Kane. It's time." By morning the well was still. The town hadn't stirred. People kept their heads down in Sierra Blanca. They always had. But Eli knew that silence wouldn't last. Not when Stroud realized his men hadn't returned. Not when Kane arrived with a warrant. And not when the whole truth came pouring out of the ground like gold dust. They'd survived the ambush. Now it was time to dig for real. The law doesn't ride alone out here, not when judges ride at night. Marshal Ruby Kane. Marshal Ruby Kane rode into Sierra Blanca at dawn, dust rising behind her like smoke from a fuse. At her side were 2 deputies from Las Cruces, and a third man no one recognized, an officer from the Territorial Circuit Court, tall, sharp-eyed, with a worn leather satchel across his chest, and an unsealed writ of arrest signed by the governor himself. Kane didn't slow down as they passed the church ruins. She didn't acknowledge the townsfolk peeking through shutters, or the handful of ranch hands pretending to stack crates at the depot. She was here for one reason, and that reason had signed death warrants with a fountain pen. Eli spotted her before she reached the well. He was working the tunnel again, this time with more speed, more certainty. Clara had barely slept, taking turns at the rope lift and scanning the horizon for more of Stroud's men. When Kane dismounted, Clara practically collapsed into her arms. "You came," she said, voice tight. Kane gave a rare smile. "Told you I would." She looked at Eli. "Is the contract safe?" Eli nodded. "Secured. Originals with Noah. Copies already with my cousin in Roswell." "Good," Kane said. "Because this town's about to wake up." They gathered in Noah's workshop, doors, bolted windows covered. Kane laid out the plan. Judge Malcolm Stroud is officially under investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of federal mining claims, and involvement in the suspicious death of Silas Blaine, she said, voice clipped and clear. "But we don't serve this until I have him in sight." Clara held up the folded note found on the ambusher the night before. "He tried to have us killed." "That enough sight for you?" Kane's eyes narrowed. "It's enough to burn him alive in court. But I want the last nail hammered with ceremony." Noah exhaled. Problem is, he's not gonna sit still once he hears his men didn't come back. He won't wait, Eli added. He'll come here. Himself. Cain nodded once. That's what I'm counting on. She didn't have to wait long. By midday, a dust trail spiraled up from the south, a black carriage drawn by 2 grays, flanked by 3 riders, all dressed in gray and tan dusters, clean and tailored. Stroud never traveled like a man with secrets. He traveled like a man who believed the law bent for him. He stepped from the carriage like he owned the dirt under his feet. Dark hat-polished boots. Eyes like polished river stones. The man had presence and he knew how to wield it. Cain met him on the edge of Main Street, warrant in hand. "Malcolm Stroud," she said. Voice loud enough for the whole town to hear. "You are under arrest by order of the territorial court. You'll surrender your badge and authority immediately." Stroud didn't blink. He looked at her deputies, then at Cain, then finally at Eli and Clara standing behind her. He smiled. "I assume you've been shown a very creative collection of fakes," he said smoothly. "I'm sure the grieving daughter spun a compelling tale." Clara stepped forward, fury in her eyes. "My father's blood is on your boots." Stroud tilted his head. "Your father fell. A tragic accident, if I recall. Nothing more." Cain didn't flinch. "We've got the contract, Judge, with your signature and the signature of the mining commissioner." "And Silas's journal," Eli added. "And a dead man's letter ordering our deaths." "With your initials." Stroud's smile dropped. For the first time, he blinked. "You don't know what you're digging into," he said quietly. "You think I'm the only one who wanted that chamber buried." Cain stepped closer. "We're not here for whispers. We're here for justice." Stroud's hand twitched. One of his riders shifted. Eli's voice was calm but sharp. "Go for that gun and you won't leave standing." A long silence passed. Then Stroud exhaled. He raised his arms. "I assume I'll be given the dignity of a proper trial," Cain motioned to her men. "You'll get something your victims never did process." They cuffed him. His men didn't fight. 2 melted into the crowd. 1 dropped his gun without a word. By nightfall, the town buzzed with quiet awe. Some cheered. Others whispered. A few scowled behind closed doors. But Stroud was gone, and the weight that had pressed down on Sierra Blanca for years lifted like a bad dream, clearing with dawn. Cain, Eli, Clara, and Noah gathered again by the well, now lit by 3 lanterns and surrounded by crates of fresh timber. The tunnel was halfway cleared. The chamber was close, but there was one piece left to set in place. "Even with Stroud gone, the gold's still here," Clara said. "People will still come for it." Eli nodded. "But we'll be ready this time." Cain looked between them. "The law doesn't ride alone out here," she said. "Not when judges ride at night." She handed Eli a signed court document, official reclamation of the land under Clara's name, and a legal claim for preservation under federal watch. "Keep it safe," she said, "and keep it honest." Then she rode out her shadow long behind her. That night, Clara and Eli sat on the edge of the well, sharing a flask, staring into the stars. "You think it's over?" she asked. "No," he said. "Just quieter." They listened to the wind whistle through the shaft, like the land exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Then Clara smiled. "Let's finish what he started." Eli raised his flask. "To Silas." "To truth," Clara added. They drank, but neither of them saw the figure watching from the edge of the ridge just beyond the lantern light. The rider didn't move, didn't speak. He simply waited. because the well hadn't given up all its secrets yet, and not every signature in the portfolio had been accounted for. It's not just gold down there, Eli. It's everything they tried to erase. Clara Blaine. The first real light broke through just past noon. It filtered in like a secret finally confessed, thin and golden, bleeding through the last slats of earth Eli and Clara had carved away over 3 long days. The new shaft had held steady, reinforced every 4 feet with beams cut and planed by Noah himself. The tunnel had narrowed, dropped, twisted left, then hollow. When Eli's pickaxe sank into nothing, the sound it made echoed like a bell in his ribs. Clara dropped to her knees beside him, lantern trembling slightly in her grip. Eli set his hand against the softened clay and pressed. It gave. Just enough. They dug together, slow, careful breath held like glass. And then it opened. The chamber. The air that spilled out was cold and stale, as if the earth itself had been holding its breath since the day Silas Blaine was murdered. Eli lowered the lantern in. The flame flickered over a cathedral of quartz veins and blackened shale walls glinting with flecks of gold that shimmered like stars in a dark sky. A collapsed support beam lay angled in the far corner, half buried in rubble. And near the center, partially covered in dust, was a canvas satchel sealed with wax. Clara gasped. "That's his!" Eli slid down first, careful of every step. The ground felt firmer than he expected, as if it had waited for their weight. He crouched beside the satchel and unfastened the straps. Inside were papers, water-stained but readable. A folded map. 2 loose pages written in Silas's unmistakable hand. He read aloud. "If this chamber is opened, then someone didn't stop asking questions. Good, you were meant to. Inside this vault is proof not just of the gold, but of who helped bury it. Not all of them signed the contract. One man refused, said it was a mistake. He tried to warn me. They silenced him first." Eli glanced up at Clara. There was another. She nodded slowly, pale. The missing name. He turned the second page. There, in shaking script, Clara's eyes widened. Raymond Thatcher. Eli's voice dropped. The mining commissioner. Clara's breath caught. He wasn't just involved, he was the first to be killed. Eli flipped the map over. Pinned between its folds was a photograph, grainy black and white. 5 men. Silas Delaney Knox Stroud, and a 5th man. Tall, trim, military posture. The face they'd never connected before. "That's him," Clara whispered. "But not Thatcher." Eli stared at the image, realization hitting like a landslide. "It's Bishop Wills." Clara blinked. The man who gave Silas's eulogy. He changed his name. Hid in plain sight. Clara stepped back like she'd been struck. All these years, and he's been here the whole damn time. They returned to the surface as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the foothills. Noah met them at the rim of the shaft rifle slung casually over his shoulder. "Well," he asked. Eli held up the satchel. "We found the vault. Gold, documents, and a name we missed." Noah arched a brow. "Wills, yeah," Clara said. "The holy man." Noah whistled low. "That's dark." "We need Marshal Kane," Eli said. "Tonight." "I'll ride for her." "No," Clara cut in. "We go together." Eli met her eyes. "We leave in an hour." But the man they sought was already moving. Bishop Elijah Wills stood alone in the chapel's side room, staring at a cracked crucifix. His hands trembled slightly as he poured a small flask of whiskey into a tin cup, sipped once, then exhaled. He'd seen the dust trail, seen the arrests, felt the walls shift beneath him. He knew. They were coming. And after all these years, after sermons, forgiveness, and the mask of sanctity, his past had caught up to him. He reached under the altar and withdrew a weathered lockbox. Inside, a revolver. 5 bullets. A ledger written in a cipher only 2 men had ever understood. The other was dead. He folded the book under one arm and stepped into the night. They found the chapel doors open. Candles flickered inside, still burning from evening service. The pews were empty, the altar undisturbed. But a faint sound echoed from below. Eli led the way, pistol drawn down, into the catacombs. The chapel's underground chamber had once been a wine cellar, converted into a records vault, then forgotten again. At the bottom of the stairs, they found him. Wills stood by the far wall, candle in one hand, gun in the other. He didn't raise it. "You found the chamber," he said, voice hoarse. "We did," Clara said. "We found the truth." Wills turned slowly, eyes tired. "I told Silas not to go through with it. I begged him." "You helped them kill him," Eli said. No, Wills shook his head. "I walked away. That was my sin." Silence. "I left the room before they made the plan. Thought it absolved me." Clara stepped forward. "You buried the truth and gave a sermon at his grave." Wills looked at her with pain in his eyes. "I prayed every night for someone like you to dig it back up." Eli raised the pistol. "Then consider your prayer answered." But Wills didn't resist. He dropped the gun, slid the ciphered ledger across the floor. "In there," he said. "Everything. Every payoff. Every threat. Every lie." Clara picked it up. "You'll testify," she said. "I'll do more than that," Wills whispered. "I'll confess." By dawn, Bishop Wills sat in Marshal Kane's custody. The ledger journal pages, photograph, and contract were sealed and shipped eastbound for a federal courtroom. The mine was registered, the land protected, and for the first time in 20 years, the truth outlived the lie. But Eli knew it wasn't over, because men like Stroud didn't work alone. And if they'd killed to bury this once, they'd do it again. The fire didn't die Eli, it just crawled under the dust and waited. Noah Sutton. Rain fell hard the morning they locked up Bishop Wills. Not the kind of gentle, cleansing drizzle that whispered hope, but a storm with teeth-hard, wind-driven, mud-thickening rain that turned the Sierra Blanca streets into sludge and soaked through even the strongest roofs. It felt fitting, like the earth itself was purging. Eli stood outside the marshal's office, coat plastered to his frame, watching as Wills was loaded into the prison coach bound for Las Cruces. The old man looked smaller than ever, his hands bound, but steady lips murmuring what sounded like prayer. Kane tipped her hat toward Eli. "We'll hold him. Long enough to testify. Longer if the judge keeps his spine." Eli gave a short nod. "And Stroud transferred this morning, his lawyers already howling." She smirked. "But the governor's watching now." "So are the papers." Eli said nothing. Rain pattered against his boots like clock ticks. From the corner of his eye he caught movement, a rider on the hill, too far to make out clearly. Watching. Clara joined him on the boardwalk, pulling her shawl tight. "He's not the last, is he?" she asked. "No," Eli said. Stroud might have been the face, but there's more behind the curtain. Clara nodded toward the vault. The gold still buried. For how long, Eli didn't answer. Noah Sutton had lived in Sierra Blanca long enough to know what storms really meant. He stood in the back of his workshop oil lamp flickering beside his bench, staring at a scorched piece of metal pulled from the original collapsed shaft. The markings were faint, but still there, serial codes etched beneath layers of grime. He ran a gloved finger across them, feeling the grooves. Government issue, he muttered. Not mining equipment. Explosives. The kind not used by prospectors but by military contractors. The kind that didn't just bring down a tunnel, they erased it. He scribbled a note and wrapped it in oilskin. Later that day, he handed it to Eli. You might want to read that somewhere quiet. Eli opened it back at the vault. His eyes moved line by line, slow, grim. By the time he finished, he understood. Silas hadn't just uncovered gold. He'd found evidence of wartime surplus shipments being hidden and funneled through abandoned sites, materials that never made it to the battlefield. Someone had used his claim to cover a bigger operation. The ledger from Wills, it named names, some politicians, some company men. But it didn't name this. Noah's note ended with one line. The fire didn't die, Eli. It just crawled under the dust and waited. Later that evening, Clara returned from the telegraph station, face pale. I sent word to the U.S. Marshal's office about the military codes, just like you asked. Eli leaned in. What did they say they didn't? She held out the reply slip. Unknown code. Request denied. Records sealed. Eli felt the chill before the wind hit. If even the marshals weren't touching it, this went higher. Maybe even out of reach. But they weren't the only ones paying attention. At the edge of town, a black stagecoach rolled in beneath the cover of dusk. No markings. No flags. Just 3 men in gray suits, each with the build of a banker and the eyes of wolves. They didn't ask for rooms at the inn. They went straight to the land office. When the clerk didn't answer fast enough, they shut the door and made a call from their own device, something sleek, modern, and very much not from around here. Later, the clerk would swear he heard one of them say, "The Blaine vault is active. Asset uncontained." He didn't sleep that night. Neither did Eli. The next morning, Clara found the vault's entrance had been disturbed. The ropes were intact, but the pulley had been turned. Lantern soot smudged the wall. Someone had gone inside. Eli lowered himself in carefully. At first glance, nothing looked touched. But then he saw it. The ledger was gone. Not the documents, not the satchel, just the ciphered ledger Wills had given them. The one with the deepest secrets. Someone had known exactly what they were after, and had left the rest behind to keep them guessing. Clara's voice echoed down the shaft. What now? Eli looked up, jaw set. Now we stop pretending this is over. That night, in the back of the church, what was left of it, Sister Agnes lit a candle and read from Silas's journal one more time. The final page. If they take the gold, let them. If they take my name, let them. But if they ever try to take my daughter's future, may the earth rise up and swallow them whole. She closed the book, blew out the flame, and locked the journal away. The war wasn't done. It had just changed uniforms. The contract was never meant to be broken. It was meant to keep the wrong people quiet. Sister Agnes Bell. It was just after midnight when the knock came. 3 slow raps. No voice, no rush. Just intent. Clara was first to move, shotgun cocked as she moved toward the back door of the workshop. Eli stayed in the shadows, pistol-ready eyes locked on the outline in the frosted glass. A beat passed. Another knock. Then silence. Clara yanked the door open and found a sealed envelope nailed to the frame. No return address. No name. Just a wax emblem stamped with 3 vertical lines crossed by a single slash. Eli stepped forward, his expression tightening. "I've seen that before," he muttered. "On the equipment in the collapsed shaft." Clara sliced the wax with her knife and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was neat. Cold. "This land is no longer yours. The ledger was retrieved for national security purposes. Do not pursue the matter further. Your father's mistake is now yours. Final warning. No signature, no explanation, just threat." She crumpled the page, jaw clenched. "They don't get to decide what my father died for." Eli nodded. "Then we stop reacting and start hitting back." Sister Agnes had been waiting for them. She was already awake when they burst into her study, the candlelight catching the glint of steel in her tired eyes. She didn't flinch when Clara dropped the letter on her desk. Agnes read it once, then twice. Finally she said, "That emblem, it's old. Older than you think." "You've seen it before?" Clara asked. Agnes stood, walked to her shelf, and pulled out a thick book bound in cracked leather. She laid it flat and flipped through pages until she found it, a document dated 1879 signed by a federal liaison overseeing classified reclamation zones. At the bottom of the page, the same emblem. "Your father found something that was never supposed to be found again," Agnes said. "This wasn't about gold. It was about control." She looked at Eli. The contract wasn't written to protect assets. It was written to silence people who got too close. Eli leaned forward. "Who else knows?" Agnes gave a bitter smile. "People who don't leave footprints." They gathered that night, Clara, Eli, Noah, and Agnes inside the Blaine House lanterns, low documents spread across the table. Clara placed her father's journal next to the letter, then added copies of the vault map, the names from the ledger, what she remembered, and Bishop Wills's confession. "There's a pattern," she said. "Every one of those men had a connection to either the rail lines or the surplus depots after the war." Eli tapped one name. "Joseph Delaney. He ran munitions distribution. Disappeared 5 years ago." "Presumed dead," Clara added. "But no body." Noah frowned. "You think they're still active? I think they never stopped," Eli said. "They just buried deeper." Agnes reached into her coat and pulled out a small metal key, handing it to Clara. "Silas left this with me before he died. Told me not to use it unless I was sure we weren't being paranoid." "What's it for?" Clara asked. Agnes's voice dropped to a whisper. "The second chamber." Beneath the vault they'd unearthed, there had always been rumors of a lower-level one Silas had mentioned briefly in his final notes. But it had been dismissed. Too dangerous. Too deep. Until now. They waited for dawn, then rode to the site, keeping to back trails and canyons. The town had eyes, now government men dressed like businessmen, wandering too close to places they had no business being. Clara spotted one the night before. He tipped his hat at her like a neighbor. She didn't sleep after that. At the site they descended through the shaft deeper than before. Agnes guided them to the far wall where the quartz veins forked downward. There, hidden behind a false panel of slate, was an old iron hatch. Clara inserted the key. The lock clicked. Dust rose in the lantern light. They opened the hatch and found a narrow stone stairwell descending into cold silence. Eli led revolver in hand. Clara followed her father's journal clutched tightly. At the bottom they found a sealed room smaller than the first chamber, but intact. Metal shelves lined the walls filled with crates marked in codes. A rusted crate sat in the center, its lid half pried open. Inside were bundles of government records, shipping logs, manifests, coded communication between federal agencies and private contractors. Most were dated between 1865 and 1872. And beneath them, stacks of uncirculated Union currency. Clara gasped. Eli didn't move. This wasn't just a gold vault, he whispered. It was a war fund, hidden, stolen, buried. Agnes's voice echoed in the stone chamber. They weren't guarding treasure. They were guarding a secret economy. Back above ground, the wind had changed. Down the ridge, a small figure darted through brush, watching. The man rode fast back toward town, back toward the dark windowed inn where the businessmen stayed. Inside that room, a briefcase snapped shut. A voice on the telephone line whispered. They opened the second door. A pause. Then activate protocol. That evening, Clara stood on the front porch of her father's house, staring at the mountains. She felt the storm again, not in the sky, but beneath her feet. Not weather, not memory. A reckoning. She turned as Eli joined her. "We need to take this beyond the courts," she said. "We need someone who can't be bought, can't be threatened." Eli hesitated. "I know someone," he said. "Back east. A journalist, old friend." Clara nodded. "We bring the story to light." Eli looked down the empty road. "They'll come for us before that happens." Clara's eyes hardened. Let them. The night they set the trap, the town felt still, too still. Sierra Blanca had always carried quiet like a scar, but this was something else. Not the silence of peace or sleep. It was the loaded silence before a storm breaks, when every board in every wall seems to hold its breath. Clara stood in the upstairs window of the Blaine House Rifle, cradled in her arms, watching the edge of town. She had memorized the hills, the shapes of mesquite against the moonlight, the paths the riders would take if they came. And she knew they would. Inside, Eli was crouched over the telegraph, tapping furiously. Journalist confirmed, sending backup. 3 days out. 3 days might as well be 3 years. They wouldn't last that long without a fight. At midnight they came. 2 black cars, unnatural against the desert dirt, crept into town from the east road. No lights, no engines heard until they were nearly upon them. Eli and Clara were ready. Noah was stationed behind the barn with dynamite wired to the rear fence. Sister Agnes watched from the bell tower with a scoped rifle, hands as steady as her faith. The first car stopped near the well. The second turned toward the house. Eli looked at Clara. "They're not here to threaten us this time." She nodded once. "Then we don't threaten either." The flashbang came first. It shattered the parlor window, flooding the house with a blinding white light and deafening burst. Eli staggered back, ears ringing. Clara hit the floor and rolled behind the sofa, gun already up. They came fast, tactically trained, black-gloved, silent. Not soldiers, not lawmen. Something in between. Eli took the first one down with a shot to the knee. The second was stopped by Sister Agnes, one round center chest from across the churchyard. Outside, Noah triggered the charge. Fire roared across the fence line, forcing the rear unit to scatter. Chaos, but not confusion. Because Eli and Clara had prepared for this. Room by room, window by window. When the dust settled, 4 men were down. 1 fled, limping into the hills. Another was found hours later, unconscious in the creek. But the house still stood. And so did the truth. They sat in silence after bruised and bloodied. Eli held a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. Clara stared into the fireplace, one leg bandaged hand trembling. Agnes said nothing, just placed a Bible on the table and walked away. The moment stretched thick and raw. Then Clara broke it. "What if we send it all now?" she said. "Not wait for lawyers or courtrooms. Just put it out into the world." Eli looked at her. All of it, Clara nodded. The journal, the letters, the second vault, the names. "If we die tomorrow, someone will know," he thought for a long time. Then he said, "We'll need copies, distributed across states. Mail it, print it, burn the original if we have to." She smiled. "You still think like a lawyer. Some habits die hard." By sunrise, packets were en route to journalists, lawyers, universities, even the Library of Congress. What they had could not be silenced anymore. But the message wasn't just about gold. It wasn't even about the murder of Silas Blaine. It was about what gets buried when people in power choose silence, and what rises eventually when others choose not to. Weeks passed. Marshal Kane returned flanked by U.S. agents. She brought news Stroud had been moved again, high security, no bail. Wills had testified. Other names were surfacing. And more disturbing, every agent who had come for Eli and Clara had vanished from official records. No badge numbers, no jurisdiction, ghosts in suits. Kane looked them both in the eye. "You just kicked a hornet's nest that's been sealed since the Civil War." "We didn't kick it," Eli said. "We opened it and lit it on fire." She smiled tight. "Good." Before leaving, she handed Clara a small leather pouch. "For your father," she said. Inside was a badge, weathered but real. Silas Blaine's original mining claim recertified under Clara's name. She cried for the first time in weeks. Sierra Blanca changed after that. Slowly. The vault was sealed again, but not hidden. A monument was raised near the shaft, etched with names: Silas Blaine, Raymond Thatcher, others who had tried to speak and died for it. School children visited. Writers came. Even a documentary crew. But the town kept its quiet soul. It remembered. Eli stayed on restoring the Blaine house. Clara opened a small legal aid office. Noah took over the general store and stopped carrying a gun. Agnes kept the bell ringing every Sunday. One evening, months later, Clara and Eli sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills. She passed him a glass of whiskey. He took a sip, then asked, "Do you think it's over?" She looked out at the desert. Thought for a while. "No," she said, "but maybe it started becoming something better." Eli leaned back in his chair. They tried to bury the truth. They did, Clara agreed. But we learned something. He glanced at her. "What's that?" She raised her glass. "The deeper you bury a secret, the louder it screams when it claws back up."